What's good, y'all? T in this thing. All right, so today we're doing a beginner's guide to Lightroom Classic and editing photography. So if you're looking for more of an advanced technique, it's not going to be that today, but if you want me to go more in depth on certain things in advanced, you can leave me a comment and let me know. But all right, let's get it. All right, so jumping into Lightroom Classic, we're just going to edit this photo today. So to make sure there's no edits or no corrections, I'm going to go ahead and reset all settings on this photo. So there you go. This is the before and after. It's the same exact thing. Okay, so first and foremost, we're going to start with white balance. So white balance is going to be the color temperature of your photo. So if someone, for example, is wearing like a white shirt in your photo or like a gray shirt, you can actually use this eyedropper to click on that shirt and give you that white balance. However, with this, the sky was actually kind of gloomy that day. So the sky literally looked like this, and it wasn't necessarily white or gray, so I'm not gonna click on that, but even if I do, it doesn't make that much of a difference. But if you don't have anyone who is wearing white or gray, you can use the sliders here. So if you want a more of a cool look, more of an orangey look and things like that. So for this, since it was kind of cold, I'm just gonna slightly make it over to the bluer side. And then obviously the tint is essentially the same thing, but if you had some, green in your photo, you'll bring it more to like magenta. And then if you had more of a magenta and you want more green, you'll just bring it over to the green side. So with that, you can kind of just eyeball it and see what looks good for your photo. Moving right along, we have exposure. So exposure is basically going to be the overall darkness or lightness of your photo. So if you were to bring it all the way down, that's going to be way too dark, but it basically just affects your entire image. And then the same for the lights, it's going to brighten it up, but clearly we know that's just too much. So this is normal. I honestly don't really touch exposure all that much unless I feel like I need to go back. So I'm personally going to leave it like this. And then contrast, it's basically going to affect kind of the shadows and highlights of your image. So if you bring the contrast all the way down, it makes your image look really flat because there's no contrast. But if you want to kind of add a little bit more color, like darkness to your shadows and textures, then you can kind of bump it up. So I'm going to bring just a little bit, maybe like 5, 6 looks okay. Now highlights, the highlights is going to pretty much affect exactly what it says, the highlights in your image, so like the whites. So since in my image it's really just this top section here, so you're gonna see at the top it really, just only does the top there because that's the only thing that affects. A little bit down here, but a majority up there. So I'm gonna try to bring it down a little bit, but like I said, since the sky looked like that, it's kind of blown out, so there's not gonna be much I can do, but I'm gonna bring it down just a little bit. And then shadows, that's gonna affect the darker parts, this section in your image, well, that section in my image, but yours might be slightly different. So whatever shadows you have, it's gonna either darken them if you go all the way down or lighten them. And typically if you bring it all the way up, it can look grainy or flat. In this case, it looks more, well, it does look grainy, but I don't ever bring it up that much anyway. But I'm going to bring it up a little bit, like 15. Now, the whites and the highlights pretty much go hand in hand, so it's still gonna affect the same part of my image up here. That's really the only whites that I have, maybe a little bit down here. But yeah, if you bring it all the way down, it's gonna affect those whites, all the way up, affect the whites. But yeah, I'm not really gonna mess with that. -2 probably is better for this image. And then blacks and shadows go hand in hand. So whatever shadows and whatever blacks you have is essentially going to be the same thing. It's just going to kind of enhance that. So for this, I'm actually going to bring my blacks up a little bit, maybe like 5. So then that's pretty much like the basic section of your editing is the correction. So it's really important that you correct your image before, applying any type of extra creative looks. Like, you don't want to like add a whole bunch of different colors and you didn't correct the image first, because then it's just not always going to turn out right unless you're going for like a creative look. But yeah, so that would just be the white balance and then this tone section here. and then a before and after. It's very subtle, you know, you may not even be able to spot it, but it's a little bit brighter for the most part. So say you made a mistake, for example, and you brought the exposure all the way up and you're like, how do I get it back? There's really, I guess, 3 ways you can bring it back, but the most convenient ways is you can either click on this number here and put in, if you just wanted it to go back to 0, you can hit 0 and it will go back. Or what I typically just do is you double click on this little slider here and it will bring you back to that same default. So if it's at 0, then you'll go back to 0. And then the third way, which, you know, whatever, is you can pretty much do the same thing with this, but use the arrows and click and hold and drag. But I pretty much just click to go back because it's the fastest, it's the easiest. All right, so now going down here, we have texture, clarity, dehaze. And they pretty much do exactly what they say. So texture basically adds more texture to your textured areas. So I have a lot of texture here in the trees, you know, with the leaves and the branches and all of that. So if I add a lot of texture, you can see it pretty much sharpening those areas, and it actually looks ridiculous because that's just too much. And then if you take it down, obviously it's gonna blur it out and look like mush. But if you kind of adjust it to maybe a little bit, I don't really do a lot of texture, so it just depends on your style, but I think I'm actually even gonna bring it down to 2. Very subtle changes. And clarity is more of like that serious look, is how I like to put it. If you've seen a lot of black and white portraits, a lot of times people will just boost up the clarity, but if you basically bring it up like that, it's going to just put clarity and sharpen and texture, all of those things together, and then all the way down it kind of gives you this, I don't even know what to call it, look. Kind of like a painting type look. Sometimes I don't always mess with this because I use that in the brush. We'll get to that later. So I'm just gonna leave that there. So dehaze basically adds or takes away the haze in your photo. Haze is such a weird word if you say it too many times. Haze, haze, haze. Anyway, if you have haze, you can either bring it up to try to remove some, or you can bring it slightly down to try to give you that foggy look. So this is all the way down, this is all the way up. I'm actually going to bring it up a little bit, maybe like 3. Now we're down to vibrance and saturation. So the best way I remembered the difference between vibrance and saturation is vibrance, think of it as it's adding more life to your colors. So if you bring up vibrance all the way up, obviously it's just bringing out all of those colors. You see the wood has the orange, the tiles here, the house is blue, the trees are just really green, you know, it's bringing more life. And then obviously if you bring the vibrance all the way down, it's kind of deathly, I guess. It's hardly any life. Like it may look black and white to you, but if you kind of zoom in, you still get some green, you still whatever. It's just more of not life, I don't know. And then with saturation, it pretty much cuts out all colors. So versus here where you still kind of get some of that green down here, if you were to bring the saturation down, there's no more green, there's no color anywhere. It just brings it black and white. And then if you bring it all the way up, it kind of looks the same as vibrance with that vibrant color, but again, just kind of think of them both as life and death, except for vibrance is still going to give you some color versus saturation is going to give you no color. So that's going to be like black and white, take all the colors out, no life. Usually what I'll start off doing is I may bring the saturation up to 5 depending on the photo. Like if I was like, okay, well, I just don't really want to do anything else, then, you know, this could be your lazy way and call it a day. But I do quite a few things to my photo, so I'm just going to bring it to 5. And vibration right now, I'm just going to leave it. Now we get to everyone's favorite part, the tone curve. So I'll be honest, the tone curve took me the longest to, I wouldn't even say that I mastered it. I'm still finding different ways that I like to add it in my photos, and I'm still learning with the turn curve. I was gonna say turn curve, I don't know. But I know the essentials and how powerful it can be. So just think of it, this is the simplest way that I learned best. So this is basically from your blacks to to your whites, your darks to your shadows, your darks to your whites, whatever you want to remember it as. So do 3 points, right? Do one here, here, here. So this is basically like your highlights, your midtones, your shadows. And then this up here is like your highlights, your whites, and this is like your darks and your blacks, right? So there's different ways you can obviously adjust the tone curve. If you don't want to move these points because you think it's gonna look like this and you just don't want to do that, cool. All you have to do is click on this little circle here, and then if you wanted to adjust your whites, then you will, you know, click and drag down, and obviously, you know, that was just an example. It's not gonna look like that, but, you know, just different things like that. You can use this, click and drag this, and do different things. So yeah, that's one way, or you can actually click and hold the points and drag them up and down. So the way that I taught myself, right? So like I said, is just do those 3 points on the shadows, midtones, highlights. And then just make subtle up and downs that will look like an S. You probably heard the S curve. The S curve can save your life. The way I do it is because I actually like that faded look, and how to get that faded look is you want to drag the blacks up. You don't want to do too crazy because you're going to get back to this point. Just, you know, honestly, I kind of drag mine up quite a bit depending on the photo, but that is good to me right here. And then, since you have this point kind of in the middle of this point, just bring it down a little bit. I think that's good. And then go to your midtones, and your midtones is basically the middle area. So think of middle is the middle area. Is the best way I kind of remembered. And then you kind of just adjust a few things from there. So you can bring things up, bring things down. I'm gonna bring this down a little bit. All right, so that's, I'm gonna turn it on and off. It's still doesn't look all that great, right? But we're getting there. I'm just trying to do pretty much like the absolute basics for you guys. But yeah, just try to make it like an S curve. I don't have a lot of points, but even if I were to reset this, right, you can still do basic things, and so you can bring, you know, this up, bring this down, not too much, and then kind of bring this a little bit, bump that up slightly, you know. These are like the basic things that you can do. So you can see it's kind of like an S. You can even adjust it a little bit, but even if you turn this on and off, I mean, it still looks, it looks great. Simple S curve, I'm telling you, just mess around with it. And then, you know, it is RGB, so you can adjust your reds, greens, blues, but that is more of like, I would say, the advanced type section. So if you guys want me to do another video getting into that, let me know. And also, one thing to think of the curve as is it's pretty much adding contrast to your photo. So if you're like, what does the curves even do? It adds contrast to the photo. So if you even wanted to take this off up here, you can see it didn't even make that big of a difference. So it's constantly a back and forth for me. You know, I may go up here, adjust something, and like I did, take off contrast and be like, well, you know, it's fine, I don't really need it. Come down here, maybe adjust something and be like, oh, well, maybe I want to add some more highlights and stuff like that. It's always a constant back and forth between all of the panels. So anyway, going down to the color. So this is where you can adjust colors separately. So you can see I don't have any reds in this photo. So if I were to bring up the saturation and everything like that, it doesn't do anything because I don't really have any reds. So anytime I don't have a color in there, I always just bring the saturation all the way down. But I do have some oranges because the wood is kind of like that orangey color. So if I were to bring up the saturation, you can see it's affecting the wood and then a little bit of the dirt here. So basically with this section, the hue is the color itself. So you can see there's red and then it goes to yellow. So if I wanted the wood more of a red color, you bring it over to the reds. And then if you wanted it more of a yellow, you bring it all the way to the yellow. So that's what the hue is. And then saturation, again, is more life or death. And then luminance is the way I think of the word luminance is, in Spanish, moon is luna. So if you think of it that way, you know, when you think of the moon, or at least when I think of the moon, it's dark. It's dark outside. I can see the moon clearly. I know you can see the moon during the day, but I'm just talking about at night, you know, luna. And so luna, luminance. I don't know. It's just my brain. I'm just trying to help y'all out. So yeah, this is going to be the darker and lighter parts of your image. First of all, let me correct this because it's just not the mood. All right, so yeah, the luminance is the light or dark. So if I want it to be more of a darker color, you bring it all the way down, and then lighter. So to me, that looks pretty good, so I'm gonna leave it at that. So that's pretty much what I do, is I just sit here and I go like this to see what it affects, and then I kind of play around with it at that point. So if I wanted it more green, I definitely could. Or if I wanted to see more like fall-y type in this case, then I could. And you just go through and do that for each color. And then of course, if you wanted to do them all at one time, you have all these colors here. Moving right along. So next is split tone. So this basically splits the highlights and the shadows with the color that you choose. So for my photo, I think I want the highlights a little bit more of like that yellowish color, and then obviously if I bring it up, you can see what it's affecting. And then the shadows is basically the shadowed color. So yeah, the saturation is pretty much more of that color in that area, so more of that yellowish color in the highlights or less. And then same with the shadows, it's just more of the color in the shadows of that color, if that makes sense. And then the balance, think of it as 50-50. So if you wanted to, let me bring this up a little bit. So if you drag the balance all the way to -0, it's going to bring more of those shadows out. And then if you bring it all the way to the opposite end, it's going to bring more, basically everything from the highlights. So for the most part, I always leave it at 0, but sometimes I adjust it, not by much. So I'm gonna leave it at that. And then after split toning, I actually jump straight to calibration. And calibration is basically recalibrating the colors, is the way that I remember it. So you have your tint, which honestly, I don't ever touch the tint right here. So you can kind of play around with it, but it's just the tint of your shadows and things like that. You want it a certain look. It kind of just recalibrates those colors. I don't really know how to explain it any other way. But yeah, I just kind of go like this to see what I like. I actually kind of like this a little bit over here, about 35. And then saturation is the same thing as before, the life or death or vibrance, however you want to think of it. So keep in mind, this does go off of you and your style and your creativity. So, you know, you may look at this photo and be like, what are you doing? But I mean, this is what I like for my photo. But anyway, once I'm done with calibration, then I kind of go back up to detail, which is like, you know, sharpening and noise reduction. I heard a few things about if you try to print your image and you have it sharpening, it's gonna look like ish. But if, you know, you don't, cool. But sometimes I'll play around with the sharpening if I know I'm just gonna post it on social media, or if not, sometimes I just completely bring it down. And then noise reduction is going to reduce the noise in your photo. I don't really touch this in this aspect sometimes in Photoshop when I'm doing certain things, but yeah, so you can kind of just play around with that. Then you got your lens correction, where, you know, maybe you shot it on a Nikon, but you came in here and it said like a Canon or something. So you can come on here and enable, and you can adjust it to the camera that you have. It brought up all my information for my camera, and you can kind of see how it changed the photo. And then, you know, if it got your camera wrong, you'll just come in here and select what camera you had. But I don't ever touch this stuff here or this stuff. I really just leave that how it is. Moving right along, little doggy, we have transform. So the only thing I really just do here is I level it out. To be honest, that's all I do. Now, if you wanted to adjust these to, you know, make it look however, whatever way you're trying to do it, I mean, cool, but I really only use it for leveling. And then this here, you can click on this little grid looking thing, and if you have straight lines and you know the level wasn't working, you can actually, you know, add your own level, if that makes sense. So it will, these guides will basically help you level out your photo if you didn't want to use the level itself, or you just wanted to do it this way. And then we have effects, and so this is basically your vignetting, you know, the classic add dark or add white. Every time I see this, to be honest, I think of obituaries. So yeah, I hardly ever go to the white side. Occasionally I may add a little vignette, not always. And then you have grain, where you can bump up the grain and make it look grainy, or no grain. So in this case, I'm doing no grain. Occasionally I will add grain, but this is this whole section here. Now, I know if you stuck around this long, you're a G and you are ready to conquer this year. Now we are almost done. Now we're kind of just gonna fire rapid through this thing because we only have like a few more things left. So this is basically where you can crop your image. So to keep it simple, you can go over here to original, and you can either, you know, if it's for Instagram, hit it to 4:11 is typically what I pick, and boom, there you go. Or if, you know, you wanted something else, you can come over here and pick one of these options. And then say if you wanted something just crazy and not like a fixed ratio, you can click this thing here, and so that way you can do whatever kind of funky styles, crops you want. And then we got the spot removal. So this is, you know, say you wanted to remove this branch looking thing, you'll click on it. It's going to select a similar area. You can move it around if you feel like another area will fit best, and it removes a spot. So, you know, if I wanted to remove this random branch and add some more trees, you can do that. But as you can see, you know, it doesn't do the best job. So sometimes if I have like more in-depth things, instead of me going over it 1,000 times and trying to get the right area, I typically will bring it into Photoshop and do it that way. But rapid fire, we're moving on. You could change the size, the feathering, opacity, all of that. All right, here is the red eye correction. Say you use like a flash, or there was a light, anyway, you took a picture and somebody's eyes look like they were just about to have lasers because their eyes were red. This is where you can do that and choose, you know, is it a pet eye and stuff like that, and adjust that there. Clearly, we don't have anybody in this photo, and I never really have a red eye problem. So I think I've used this maybe never. Then moving on, we have the gradient filter. So with this, I use this often. So basically you will just click and drag. You can drag it for long periods of time, short periods. But if you hover over this circle, it will show you in red what's being affected. But yeah, so you can adjust this. You can add colors, saturation. Let's see. I don't really think I'm going to do anything for this particular photo, to be honest. Oh, to flip it around, if you wanted, you just hover over this circle and then go over a little bit to the right or left, and you'll get these two arrows. Just click and rotate it, and then it will rotate to the opposite way. Okay, I actually don't mind this. So this is all I'm gonna do with that today. And then if you wanted a new one, you'll just hit new, and then you have the brush section as well. So then from here we have the radial filter. This is the same thing as this one, it's just in a circle. I use this a lot if I'm trying to make a certain subject pop or something like that. So in this case, I may want the house to be like the subject of attention, but as you can see, it doesn't look good, and it's doing everything outside of the house. All you have to do is scroll down here, hit invert, and then it'll be inside of the circle. Let me just reset everything. So yeah, I would, since it's inside, you know, I may bring the shadows up, a little texture, maybe a little dehaze. And then what I typically do is I'm on the circle, I right click, I duplicate, and I go back down here and I take off the invert. So now if I just kind of reset everything, I can bring like the shadows down. Just to show you what it's doing is basically making the house pop. But yeah, it's not gonna look like that. I'm just gonna do very subtle changes. So I feel like that's good. And then the brush, this will allow you to adjust certain areas. So it's not like, you know, these filters here where it's affecting like a group. This actually is like individual. So typically what I do with the brush is, so let's see, let me just bring up the exposure so I can show you what I'm talking about. So we're on the brush, and say again I wanted the house to have its own clarity and make the house pop. So I'll click on the house and, you know, I'll brush it, but you see it's only brushing it's only affecting what I'm brushing, instead of if it was like the radial, anything that's within that circle is being affected. So if the circle is, you know, this big, everything within that circle is going to be affected, versus the brush, it's just whatever I brush. So typically when I do that, I add a little bit more clarity to whatever I want to be like the main focal point. I'm gonna bring the exposure down a little bit. And then of course, you know, you can adjust certain things that you want to maybe have a little bit more of that pop, or, you know, kind of just show highlights. I'm really just doing this kind of quick, but you get the point. Okay, so now that would be our final photo. Yeah, for the most part, I like it, I dig it. That's pretty much the essentials. Like I said, there would be a few different things that I would adjust in Photoshop, like these sticks and a few other things, but that is pretty much the gist. I know it was a longer video, so if you made it to the end, you are a G. You are a G. And yeah, comment if you made it to the end. Also, tag me on Instagram with your photos and let me know, did this help? Did it not help? Do you want me to do advanced techniques and things like that? So yeah, anyway, I hope it helped. All right, y'all, I'm out.
Love is love. Love is love. Love is love. Love is love. Adios.